So we welcome you to the Innovation by Design series. Today we have designing experiences in the IoT age. And what we're going to be doing over the next hour is 45 minutes of discussing with our panelists on this topic on smart connected and designing experiences in the IoT age. And then we'll take your questions. So be sure to look at the questions tab where you can submit your own or vote for other questions. We'll make sure we get to those questions that have the most votes. And then what we also would like to do is get to all of them if we can. All right, so please do put yours in. And then what we'll also have is we have the polls. If you can submit any of your thoughts where you are on the polls, that would be wonderful. It helps our panelists really know how they should be tailoring some of their answers, depending on how mature you are in the IoT space. And we do have people standing by on Twitter. We're at altitude_Inc. It's hashtag innovation by design, hashtag design thinking. And the question that always comes up, yes, we will send you the record. You will get the record on Monday through email. So with the Internet of Things, IoT, of course, it's a chance for product companies to reinvent themselves with deeper customer engagement and new business models. But to leverage smart connected products, you need to start by putting the technology aside and really focusing on the people. We have, I wanted to say 3 excellent panelists. We may have 2, we may end up with 3 a little bit, but right now we have 2 excellent panelists from Stanley Black Decker and Altitude, who are knowledgeable about creating IoT offerings that customers truly love and that will deliver business success that you're looking for. So today, let me go ahead and introduce our first panelist, David Balcom. Hello, David. And David
Hello, thank you for having us today.
Oh, we're so glad you're here. Director of Digital Products at Stanley Black Decker, a 174-year-old company and an S&P 500 company. David's focused on extending companies' leadership in mechanical electrical products to those products that take full advantage of the emerging Internet of Things. So David will have a lot of great informative dialogue for us today. We think you'll find it very beneficial. And Dan Ostrower is CEO of Altitude. Hey, Dan.
Hi.
And Altitude is now part of Connected Product Innovation at Accenture, for anyone who hasn't heard. Altitude is a design and innovation consulting firm based in Boston with clients such as Under Armour, Nike, Thermo Scientific, and we've also done work with Stanley Black Decker. So we're very happy to connect with David. And I am Gretchen Hoffman, Vice President of Marketing at Altitude, and my role today is as the moderator. So as you can see from the bios of the panelists, they're very, very impressive, and they come from different vantage points. David's from Stanley Black Decker. He's focused on what the realities are it takes to really make IoT happen inside an organization. And Dan of Altitude is focused on how IoT is a call to action for companies today and how a human-centered approach is key to addressing IoT. So you'll hear from different perspectives, which I think will be beneficial for those listening in. So let's go ahead and get started with our first question. David, would love to ask you, really, could you walk us through a few examples that are on the right track or successful for designing experiences using IoT and share what's really good about them?
Sure, happy to do that. And thanks again. We're really happy to be here. I think for us, it starts the great examples of IoT, and IoT means a lot of things to everybody. So for us, it means the connecting people, places, and things in a meaningful way, understanding what those interactions look like and how to best offer experiences to consumers, to our customers. So here are a few examples that I think privilege a clear problem statement or create something that might delight users. And they're both in the consumer space. The second one is pretty obvious. So I'll start with the first one, which is a company called August Locks. And I think what's really amazing about August Locks and what they do with their solution, which is to provide a smart lock for your home or place of business that is extremely easy to use. It starts with a problem statement. Some cases it's a need you have, and others it might be a need that you didn't know you had, but now can't live without. So your key will still open the door, but your phone can also open your door. So it doesn't take away this notion of a smart lock where it's all smarts, and then if you forget your key, you can't get into your house, right? Because the technology is inside the house, not visible outside. It's immediate. It happens quickly. And then it's really focused on a clear problem statement, which is that controlling who and how you enter your own home. And the other point I would make is that it's kind of an indistinguishable physical digital solution. When the solutions or the friction points between the physical and the digital draw attention to themselves, then I think you're kind of on the wrong track. And when they become indistinguishable is when I think you're on the right track. So that's one example. The second one is pretty obvious. It's the Amazon Echo. It really captured, I think, captured hearts. I think it's delightful to use. It's very simple. It works with other ecosystems. It's connected in very smart ways to other ecosystems. And then it appreciates over time in that it actually gets more and more useful. That's, I think, a hallmark of a great connected product, is that it continues to get better based on feedback of consumers, but based on the ability to support a digital roadmap that's connected to a physical product. So those are just two examples that I think are on the right track, that are simple, are delightful, and I think we'll see a lot more of those to come.
Great. Yeah, it's interesting to see how our daily tasks are getting easier. We're getting more self-enabled with these IoT, I'll say, inventions. So, Dan, what are your thoughts in terms of who's doing it great?
Yeah, I think so. I think those are two excellent examples. August, in particular, I like because, as David said, they've really defined it not so much as a lock, but as a way to control who enters your house. And if you watch some of their promotions, actually, it's interesting that a lot of what they're showing focuses not on keeping people out, but on welcoming people in at the right times. And I think that's a really interesting reframe on the lock. So they've done a great job there. I'll throw a couple more examples out there. One is a company called Tile. So they make these little connected dongles that you can put on your keys or in your watch, or attach one to your phone. And what I really like about it is it's focused on a very clear job to be done. I want to find my stuff that is lost. Mm-hmm. And it helps you do that. So these tiles connect to an app. You can locate your devices. So simply and beautifully done. Again, that physical digital is seamlessness. One of the things that I really like about this solution as well is that they've gone beyond just we're going to connect a physical device to digital and the benefits that can offer. It brings in the benefits of all the community that's connected together. So you can, if you lose your phone, for instance, you can activate the entire Tile community to help you find it and retrieve it. And that's, I think, really interesting and powerful. And that's something that physical analog products by themselves simply cannot do. The other examples I'll throw out there are some stuff that are starting to happen in the swimming pool space. These are really early, and I don't know that the execution is there yet. There's a company, for instance, called Sutro. But again, what I like about them is they're really focused on a clear job to be done statement, which is, if you own a pool, you don't want to spend your time cleaning it and maintaining it. You just want to know that the water is healthy and ready to get in. And so they're combining sensors and they're to measure pool water quality and connecting it to the chemicals and connecting it to pool service to integrate that all together so that you have a solution that is just the water is ready when I want it to be. So I think some really, and those are really untapped needs. So I think some really interesting stuff happening there. The last thing I'll say is there's a ton of stuff going on in industrial. We've only mentioned consumer, ton of stuff going on in industrial. There's a lot of value to be had there. Oftentimes the value propositions are even clearer, right? Keep my equipment up and running, very clear, higher efficiency, more reliability. So good stuff happening there too.
One that caught my eye, it was interesting. It was the CES show this year. I have thick hair, and you may be able to tell. And I'm always trying to figure out can I get away without a day not washing it. And I don't know if I pronounced the company right, but Kerastase and Withings, they had a smart hairbrush. It was unveiled there, and it's really called like a hair coach. But the brush brings smart technology, to you in the morning, right? So essentially, what it does is sensors that allows you to collect the data of the condition of your hair and sends it over your smartphone along with tips for how to personalize your routine. Right. So for me, what I liked is it tells me, do I have to wash my hair that day or can I get away without? So I thought that was kind of a cool,
Good to know.
cool
Good to
invention. Yeah, I'm sure you both
That's
could
right.
use that very well, but
Right. Yeah.
for me, I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I doubt I'm the target market unless it can grow hair also. But that's interesting. My daughters would love it.
So David, can you elaborate a little bit on why design experience is key to IoT and what the keys really are to success here?
Well, and as we, the examples that I think we've mentioned are good examples of design and simplicity. So I think really design has to start with why people will care, not what the product is. It's not to use technology for technology's sake or to put something into a product because you've invented it and you feel you're proud of your invention. It's rather why your consumers will care about that product, and that's why. From our perspective and from the products we talked about, whether it's August locks or the Eero, Wi-Fi router or the Echo, that we're seamlessly kind of blending, or in those cases, those company products are seamlessly blending the digital and the physical, and from our perspective at Stanley Black Decker, and the IoT endeavors and the products we're working on, we view these as single products, not as these kind of discordant physical object that is then controlled by a separate digital object or digital application. It really has to start with thinking about it as a single product that meets a need, as Dan was saying as well. And so I think the counterexample is you don't want to, when you walk into a room and you want to turn your lights on, you don't want to pull out your phone and open up an app to do that. You can, but the use case for using the phone is different. It may be when you're not in the room. What you want to do when you want to turn your light on is you want to flip a switch, make it really simple, or tell it to turn the lights on, as you can do with an Echo and a Hue, for example. So again, it's the right, design is about the right experience at the right time in the right situation. So that's what we think about when we think about design, and to really think through other cases for a consumer needing to use your product in an environment, in a space with a certain noise or light level. So those are just a few examples of why we think design is really important and why focusing on simplicity is crucial.
Yeah, often focusing on the simplicity is harder than it seems, right? You got to go through the complex.
Simple is actually very hard.
Yeah.
Simple is hard.
Yeah.
Dan, do you have any other thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, David is talking about what the critical idea of design being that you're starting with the why. You're putting the user at the center, or the person you're serving at the center, and you're starting with why do they even care, and then you're orchestrating your solution around that, and that's the centerpiece of design. It's important in any product. It's certainly important when you're putting products that are physical and digital together because it's even harder to get right. But I'd even take it a step further, which is that I think we're seeing a really interesting thing happen with the IoT, which is that we're used to thinking about industries as kind of structured around products. There's an automobile industry and there's a power tools industry. That's going to go away. IoT is going to make that go away. Essentially, since it allows everything to be connected together, right? People will no more have to buy these individual products, put them together for themselves to get a job done. Industries are actually going to structure themselves around why people buy the products in the first place. You're seeing this already in automotive. It's
sure,
not
Teslas,
yeah, Teslas and Uber. Right? It's not so much it's a car industry anymore. It's a mobility industry. It's a getting from point A to point B industry. So if that's happening, if industries are going to fundamentally restructure around jobs to be done, if a company lacks a design perspective, they're simply not going to have a strategy. They're not going to be able to compete anymore. So I really see IoT taking the level of importance of design to an entirely new level, and essentially it being something that's required for success in companies in a new age.
Dan, I think one question I want to ask you then is, for talking about Tesla, I think one of the things they've done well, other than make cars that go ridiculously fast, are that they really approach it from a platform perspective.
Yeah.
And this is a platform that you as a consumer can enjoy the benefits of in perpetuity.
Yeah.
Do you see a company like Tesla as a hardware company, a software company, an automaker? We're getting at the collapsing of these categories that you mentioned, but I'm just interested in how do you see them?
That's interesting. I mean, they're a little bit tough because of they've gone so deep into the energy side of things, which which I'm not sure I necessarily expected from the beginning, and I think that right now I'm sort of seeing them as kind of a transportation experience company. That I think they're architecting the pieces together that you need to have your own personal transportation system. Right, and they feel very deeply that energy is the critical job to be done to make that work, and are building their platform around that. But that's what I see of them, and I agree with you. I think that the successful companies in this new age are going to have platforms that allow them to provide experiences and create relationships with companies and collect the data that allow them to learn over time.
Yeah, no, great points, and definitely we need to focus on what are the jobs to be done. Is I think, but
exactly.
Hey, David, can you talk a little bit about the problems that we're trying to solve for people that are, have new IoT solutions, and what will the IoT solutions do today that they couldn't before? I think we've talked a little bit about it, but maybe delve into a little bit more on the problems.
Well, I think, and actually, I think Dan just got into some of these, but one of them is to get better over time. So a solution, an industrial solution to an object is to ship it and then ship another version of it at some point in the future. Ship it, evolve it, enhance it, make it better. And one of the things you can do with with connected products, and I'll use that as a kind of superset category, of which IoT solutions are part, but not all. That you can get better over time. You can learn from those interactions, from either the interactions with data that you receive, interactions with your consumers that tell you the things that are right and wrong about your products, and to be smart enough to think about how to account for new interactions over time. So I think that's how does that solve the consumer's needs? Again, if it's really about the consumer, not about we've got this great idea and we want people to use it. It's rather what do you want and need as a consumer, right? That my needs, my unmet needs can be better met with products that get better over time, and with products that can connect to other adjacent industries, other adjacent ideas, things that allow for unexpected behaviors and successes. When you put something like a Tesla experience in a consumer's hands, or an Echo, then more an Echo, less a Tesla, because ultimately the Tesla car still has four wheels and it drives, on the road, right? Whereas an Echo can expand into a number of different cases that might not have been considered when the product launched by anyone. And so we might have a need that arises that actually helps that device become smarter and better account for my unmet need. There's a book called Enchanted Objects by David Rose, and I think it's really this notion of things that are beloved to you and that you love, and that we can better get there to this world of enchanted objects where things just work, products just work, and that's that's a moment of delight, not a moment of technology, right?
David, I'm curious in that idea of products that last and evolve over time. Do you experience in your organization, is there ever any pushback against that idea? And the reason I ask that is because I think a lot of product companies, and maybe not so much a company like yours that's really built around the idea of reliability, but a lot of product companies are built on their business models are built on obsolescence. Right? The product has to go away and you have to sell them the next one. But if you're creating a platform that evolves with a customer over time, that's a shift in business model. Do you get struggle against that? Is that hard to get the company to understand?
Well, we as a company have certainly embraced digital in a big way. And so at the same time, we're 174 years old, and we do make products that we want to make better. But yeah, so there's a necessary creative tension there. There's a necessary cultural tension there, and I think that's true when you bring something that is profoundly disrupting or discomforting to something that's worked really well for a long time.
Yeah.
But we got into this because we want to continue to innovate and continue to be relevant and ahead and successful. And to do that, we know this is where we need to be. This is where our consumers are. Again, it's meeting our consumers at their points of needs.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I think your comments, David, about, we get better over time, are something to latch onto, and why we all should want to try to get into this space. And then also the fact that we want things that just work, right? I mean, we all get frustrated when we're having challenges, and as we get, more and more IoT products out there, our lives get better, they get easier. So, definitely something to look forward to, see where things evolve. Dan, why should companies get into IoT now, though, right? And, how do they go ahead and get started if they haven't already?
Yeah, I mean, so, in the first part of that question, I'll come back to some of the things that I was saying earlier. I mean, I really think if you're a company in what I call the physical economy, right? Physical products, physical service locations, things like that. This is a necessary imperative. So this is a trend driven by technology, changes in technology, sensors, processing power, cloud services, all getting cheaper and easier to use, and that's not going to change. So things are going to be connected, and as I was saying before, I think it really does fundamentally reorient industries, and it changes the basis of competition, where in the past, in the physical economy, competition is based on who has the best IP and technology, who's got the best brand, who's got the best distribution. In the future, it's about who can create the platform that allows for continuous learning, a relationship with the end customer, and the experiences that the end customer values. And those are fundamental shifts. The companies who don't make them are probably going to go out of business or be commoditized. And so you got to start. It's going to happen. You have to start, as hard as it is to start. And David mentioned some of the tensions. The tensions are real, but you got to start. The one of the ways that I think about getting started in terms of a framework is, think big, start small, scale fast. So think big means really do step back and think about what are the core needs and jobs to be done that your customer is going to require. Challenge yourself with the question, what business am I really in? Am I still in the car business, or am I in the mobility business? So take the time to think big, then start small. Once you've thought big, make something, get it out there, test it, put it in customers' hands, try it, build it, put a lab together like David has done, and do something. And then once you start feeling you're on the right track, then it's about scaling, and scaling fast. But you need to do those things in that order. So those would be one way I would think about it.
Yeah, interesting. Related to that, you've talked about jobs to be done and the things that are needed. Dan, can you talk about the specific skills and capabilities that really are needed to be successful?
Yeah, the short answer is there are a lot of them that are going to be new for physical economy companies, but I think a lot of what physical economy companies do in terms of establishing an installed base, building great products, that's all going to be critical. What's going to be new, though, going forward, if we think about those three steps, you can think about three different types of DNA associated with them. So if the first step is about think big, I would say you need to be design-oriented. Design DNA going with that is really that ability to step back, stand in the customer's shoes, and reframe. The next step is start small. I would say that's startup or agile DNA. So the ability to experiment, fail fast, learn in concert with your customers. So those are a whole new set of skills that companies need to develop. And then the last one, scale fast, that's digital DNA. Can you run a modern digital enterprise at scale? And there's a whole set of capabilities that go with that. So it's a lot, it's daunting. But it is necessary, and if you can kind of break that down into those three pieces, I think you can start tackling them.
And so, Dan, question there, because some of this, you counsel companies on how to do this, and some of this is really about change management. So what relationship does change have with embracing a digital mindset, and how would you say, how do you start, what do you do first to make culture change or to change behavior?
Yeah, I think that's a really, I think it may be the toughest question in all of this.
Do you hear that, Steph?
I tend to counsel not to try to do wholesale culture change too fast, right? So we think about, if you think about this, think big, start small, scale fast. Think about what we counsel to create a separate but connected team. So a team that is charged with doing these new digital and physical digital offerings, that is a separate team from the rest of the business units, because they need to have these new types of DNA that the existing businesses don't have yet. Also, the existing businesses need to keep performing, right? You don't want that to drop off. So a separate team that can build this separate kind of DNA, but they need to be connected to the rest of the organization because this all needs to come together initially. And I think if that team is separate and you think about them working in a glass box where everything they're doing is visible, they're pulling key people in from the rest of the organization at the right time. They're sharing what they're doing, and they're creating some of this creative tension that you talked about. But you're not asking the existing business to operate in a completely different way right out of the gate. I think that's the right change management model. And over time, those creep together.
Yeah, absolutely great points. And now I'm going to shift gears and ask David, what are the biggest challenges organizations find as they move from non-smart connected products to the smart connected products? I think we've referenced some of them, but if you could be very specific.
Yeah, I think a couple specifically would be to not treat digital as an afterthought, as a thing that happens not only after other things, but as a mode of thinking that is appended to the end of an existing process. You can't make a connected product. You can't make a good connected product if the connected part happens way after the product part, right? That is about two fundamental disconnects. One is treating the products as separate products, and then the second is considering that these new modes of interactions are somehow kind of tacked on at the end, right? So that's one. And what goes with that is fighting the urge to retrofit technology or digital processes or digital value into an existing product. So how can we make this better with digital? It's kind of the wrong question to ask. It's how can we make this a better experience? That's the right question to ask. And I think that how do we make it a better experience also means that you need to think about new success criteria, that traditional metrics need to be enhanced and thought through. You need different metrics and different ways of thinking about what success actually is, and it's that might be about engagement with a product. It might be about driving sales of a product, but not necessarily the same way that success is going to be measured. And so success becomes broader. In some cases, it becomes narrower, but it does become different. So those are just a couple points I would make to that question, Gretchen.
Yeah, excellent. Dan, do you have anything you want to add?
I mean, I think I think David's hit on really the crux of it, and he stated it really clearly. Those things are just really, really hard to do, and I would come back to the question that he asked earlier about change management. You have to really think about who you're asking to do those things, right? And is it fair or right to ask the people running the existing business who are rewarded on the existing metrics to change their behaviors in these ways, or do we need to start building up some new capabilities that didn't exist before? And so these are challenging things to get a hold of. But I think if you look at it through those lenses, it's quite possible.
Yeah, great points. Can you talk a little, Dan, on how does it vary? The comments you're making here on B2C versus B2B. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think in terms of some of the challenges and the fundamental, and how you organize and the change management, I'm not sure if that's really different. I think the big difference that we've seen is that the value proposition of IoT in B2B is just a lot clearer often than it is in consumer, right? So if we think about something like, take a B2B product like jet engines, and this is one of the places where you saw some of the first use of this type of technology, the idea that you want to be able to monitor the jet engine, know what's going on with it, diagnose it remotely, use that data to perhaps service it remotely or provide an upgrade. Like, the value proposition for the airplane owner is just so clear, right? That I think it's really easy to see the business case for getting into IoT. In consumer, it's a little bit tougher. It's a little bit harder. The value propositions are not always as clear, right? They may be hidden needs. They may be more emotional. They may be more social. So difficult for companies to get their arms around. And so it's harder. And I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen a lot in the consumer space that I would call kind of, gizmos and junk. The poster child for this was the IoT device that you'd put your eggs in, and it would tell you how many eggs you need to buy when you go to the grocery store. And what's the point of that, right? And so that was an example of, I think David talking about, the cart leading the horse. Like, let's just put some IoT technology out there rather than asking the question why. So in consumer, the question of why is tougher, right? And it requires a lot more thinking to get it right.
Yeah, it's interesting to watch all the things Amazon's doing to take advantage of IoT right now too, as in our daily lives. I mean, it's B2C, but you could say B2B too in some ways.
Right.
So, David, any other comments there for B2B or B2C variations?
I think Dan really hit them. I think if I were to add one thought, it would just to reiterate that different modes of behavior and different models are in place when we look at B2B versus B2C. And I think you need to really understand what those models are and what those modes look like.
Right.
Whether it's a B2B, is it about addressing employee behavior or providing different types of devices to employees as a company that employs lots of people, with specific IT models. How can we best roll things out to our audience, right? Or to our employees. Whereas B2C, those devices are personal.
Yeah.
And I know we're talking now about specific devices on, like telephones or things that that we all carry. But as an employer, I think through these things differently than I do as a consumer. So that's what I mean by models and modes.
Yeah. Actually, what's David saying makes me think of something else as well, which is actually a challenge in B2B that maybe is not as much in B2C. In B2B, you've got a lot of different stakeholders, right? The person who buys the product or system may be different than the person who uses it, may be different than the person who services it. And that ecosystem can be a little bit more complicated in B2B and more difficult to sort through and figure out whose needs are you really serving.
Yeah, but in the end, it's interesting when you talk about, in the end, they both need change management. It's, frankly, you need some new DNA in terms of employee skills, right? I mean, this really is a big shift.
It is very big shift.
It's amazing when you try to think about what's life really going to be like in B2B and B2C companies, in 5 years even. So, I mean, this is a big shift. So, David, did you want to add something?
No.
Okay, sorry, I thought I'd jumped in. So I just want to make sure everybody listening in that we'll be getting definitely to your questions. So be sure to put your questions in and vote for any that you want to make sure we get to first in the questions tab that you'll see on your screen. And we will get to questions in about 10 minutes. And what I'd like to do is continue with the panelists. Also engage in Twitter with us, altitude_Inc. We would love to hear from you. Please do let us know what you think of our Hangout series. And so just a few more questions I'd like to ask of David and Dan, and then we'll get to your questions. So David, could you talk a little bit about what should people be thinking about for the future? I mean, I mentioned, I think in 5 years, it's going to be crazy different, but what do you think people should be thinking about?
Well, I think we know that technology will continue to advance. And so I think the question is, how do we help advance it as a company? And then what do we do about it as consumers? So I think it's about how those consumers interact with devices and to really understand. And so again, as a company making these devices, we want to understand how our consumers interact with technology, whether it's through a screen, whether it's through something they wear, please, not glasses, right? Whether it's through your voice or through movement in time or through movement in space, those interactions, the better we understand those interactions, the better we can craft experiences around them. So for us, we're doing a lot of observation and really trying to understand as we're fortunate in that as a conglomerate, as a diversified conglomerate, we have lots and lots of resources at our disposal that we can connect and put together in really interesting ways. We're becoming a connected company as a result in bringing together what were, in some cases, varied, business interests or interests that were very specific to an industry. We're actually able to put some of those things together ourselves, which is really exciting. It's really humbling to be able to work on these. But for us, it's at core understanding user behavior and understanding how our consumers interact with these devices.
David,
second point. Sorry, Dan. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
It's really about privacy. So we talked about privacy a little bit, and also really understanding that when we provide something that's really valuable, to make it very clear how what that means for privacy, what we collect, what we do with what we collect, what we don't do with what we collect, or what we don't collect. Those are all decisions that we make as stewards, and that are very important decisions. And trust is very important to us. We're a reputable, extraordinarily well-trusted brand, and that's important to us. That we continue to honor that trust as we introduce new technologies that allow for people, places, and things to be tracked better and better. We want to be clear about what we do with those things and how we do what we do with those things, to make sure that we're good and careful stewards of that data, of those interactions, and that we continue to honor that trust.
Right.
Yeah, well, I do think most people know the Stanley Black Decker brand, and you're right, they probably have expectations, and there's expectations they have today that you want to deliver on, and in the future as IoT evolves further and further. So it's definitely a challenge that many companies are facing.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and do a bit of a summary. We've talked a lot about different insights and change management and really what we can expect and why we need to get into smart connected IoT arena. But what I think might be helpful for the listeners, if I could ask Dan and David to summarize based on where folks are in the IoT realm right now. And then what we'll do is get to your questions. So David, if I could ask you to start out and just summarize, it could be what you've already talked about, but what are the key things, like maybe a couple tips for the companies listening in that are just getting into IoT? What do you want to make sure they take away from this?
Sure. I think firstly, it is not about creating new separate products that get appended to a physical product. So for us, the digital and the physical has to be considered as one product and as one experience and one key experience or set of experiences that lend themselves to the connection between a digital and a physical product. But we want to see those as a single product that solves a problem, and that solves a problem that has a purpose and that is valuable to our consumers. So another way to say it is, don't just add digital, don't just tack it on at the end of a physical product development cycle, because that's not really that valuable. And then second, I would say make sure that you design and develop products that can get better over time through observation, through interaction. So think about the hard stuff up front. Think about how you can ship, even if, here's a good example. I'm a consumer of a product called Eero, E-E-R-O, and it's a home mesh Wi-Fi device that has made kind of a drop-dead simple solution for Wi-Fi connectivity in your home or small business. And they shipped a product last year that I was an early consumer of, and they got the hardware right. They were still clearly working through the user experience and working through kind of making sure it all just worked. But because they had thought through hardware and firmware together, they've made this product better and better over the course of the last 12 months. And I'm a beta user of the firmware and of the app that controls the product as well. And it's really been fun to watch this product get better. And yet the physical device that was in my home is still in the same place it was a year ago, but it as a product has improved because Eero successfully thought through how to ship a great product that could get better over time. So that's the second point is make it better and better.
Great. And Dan, what would you add to that for some takeaways?
Yeah, I would add, I would completely agree with everything that David's saying. I would add as a key takeaway in doing this transition, don't forget and don't be afraid to think big at the beginning of the process, right? To recognize the recognize the reality that IoT is really gonna challenge you to answer the question, what business am I really in? And take the time to answer that question. Do it from a human perspective. Let your customers be the guide. Go understand them, what really matters to them, and use that to answer that question, and let that be the guide for your efforts, right? So don't be afraid to take that time at the beginning. Oftentimes we say, go slow to go fast, right? Take some time up at the beginning, make sure you've thought that through. That's gonna make everything easier later on.
Yeah, the world is definitely evolving. So now let's address the listeners who are already along the IT path. And David, could you give a few tips? And if they're the same ones, you just reference them, but let them know what they really should watch out for to help create IoT offerings that customers will truly love.
Well, I think it's to focus on why people care, to continue to focus on why people care and what's in it for them. At the end of the day, they're the ones who use your products and they're gonna vote with their wallets. And secondly, it's I'll reiterate that point, to make sure to improve beyond the physical sale. So I think that applies in both places. So since that was a redundant one, I'll throw in a bonus one, which is to really consider and reconsider your success criteria. Again, you might be in the business of redefining success and what success is as you develop these new products. And so make sure to be thoughtful about what success looks like.
Yeah, I'll build on David's point about focusing on why people care. One of the mistakes that we see, one of the ways that we see that manifest itself for companies that are getting into the IoT game and maybe working on their first couple of things, there's a tremendous desire to move and to build something and test it. A lot of focus on minimum viable product coming out of the software space, and what we see happening is that the focus gets put on doing and losing track of why do people care. And so the minimum viable product is often wrong, right? One of the things we've heard we like a lot is thinking about a minimum lovable product rather than a minimum viable product. So for instance, if you're building a car, a minimum viable product version of a car is not a bumper or a wheel. Right? It's not just a chunk, a piece of what you're getting to. It's something that actually does the job in its lowest common factor. And that's to David's point. You got to know why people care. Focus on that. That'll help you define that first thing and make sure you get it right.
Yeah, excellent points. You know, we've seen that products can become smart, codable. People and machines can give inanimate things instructions on what to do. And now with IoT, things talk to things. So, you know, you can hear from our panelists, though, regardless of what's happening, you need to be getting into IoT if you're not already. And it really is about just accepting this is change management. Companies do need to make the shift. And it is a shift in DNA and some of the skills at the companies. And, you know, in the end, you know, make users' experiences simpler and better. And, you know, with that, what I'd love to do is turn us over to your questions. So let me just look at the questions that have the most votes. And again, I encourage everyone to go in and enter any questions you'd like the panelists to address. So the first question we have here is about privacy and security. And how does it impact your IoT experiences? How might these factors affect IoT design moving forward?
Happy to take a first crack.
Okay.
It's obviously privacy and security are really important, and IoT products, almost by their nature, are collecting data and manipulating data and things like that. I'd kind of throw a challenge out there, which is if you're designing a product, assume the thing's going to get hacked. Assume the data is going to come out of it. So can you design this thing in a way that it actually fails safe? That if that happens, there's nothing really valuable lost. And so what that really challenges you to do is to really think through what data you absolutely and really need in order to make the product and the ecosystem do its job for customers. And I think in a lot of times it might be less than you might think. And so I just think that that's a great frame to have from the beginning that can help you avoid the problems that are inherent in privacy and security labs.
I think one thing I'd add to that is that if you're writing firmware and if you want to jump into IoT, you've got a device or an appliance you're making and you're pressed for time because you're getting yelled at to ship product. And you seed your firmware development out to a third party, you better make sure you're really smart about security and that you think about security ahead of time so that your devices don't get appropriated for a botnet and that you don't have control over your own you don't have control over your own firmware to do an over-the-air update and make sure that you plug any holes you've got there. So be smart about fast can cost you. We all want to move quickly with agility, but be smart about who's touching your stuff.
Yeah, great point.
Yep.
I do want to encourage our listeners also to look at our website if you'd like any additional resources. We definitely have some great papers. Dan's written a paper on IoT, and we have a great study from Innovation Leader there, as well as other materials. So it's at www.altitudeinc.com. And everything's free. We also have the next hangout in a couple weeks with Bose, GE, and Eastman Innovation Lab entitled Understanding How Design Thinkers Think. You can register on our homepage there. So I want to make sure that you're aware of that. And let's go ahead and jump in with some more questions. So the next question I see here is, IoT from the consumer product perspective is kind of stealth data collection from the consumers. So where's the co-creation prospect we tend to value? Do you imagine that products could identify themselves more prominently, and would the company mission reflect how consumers benefit from this new era of connectivity? It's a mouthful. To our panelists, you can see the question right under questions, if that helps you, or I can repeat it. Let me know.
Well, yeah, in the two-parter here, I think, let me break this down into two parts, and then Dan and I can talk about it. I think on the first part of the question, so which is this notion of stealth data collection, where's the co-creation prospect we tend to value? Here's what I would suggest is a bad example of a new foray into connected products. The product team says, let's get something together to put into the market so that we can get a bunch of data from our consumers. Like, that's a bad way to focus on product development. Let's get some data.
Yep.
So I think that's untrustworthy and just kind of bad behavior, right? On the second, if the second part, if I can contextualize the second part as can products identify themselves more prominently and the mission reflect how consumers benefit? I think this has been a theme from what Dan and I have been talking about since the top of the hour, which is focus on why on solving a problem for your consumer and why that helps them, not why it helps you.
Yes.
But as a company, but rather why it helps them as a consumer. What are you doing? What's in it for them? Think about them first, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're just spot on. I mean, these new product development initiatives, IoT in particular, they can come out of different perspectives in a company. They can come out of the perspective of the business itself. How do we make more money? It can come out of technology. How do we do cool technology? Or it can come out of the consumer, which is how do we help the people that we serve? If it's either of those first two, as David says, I think it's likely to go wrong and you can end up in these situations. But I would say that there's nothing to prevent inviting the consumer into this conversation around the data. The IoT products will likely collect data and they will likely help you make a better product in the future. I think more and more consumers are valuing authenticity in relationship with customers. Make it apparent that this is what's happening. Invite them into the process. If it's going to make it a better product for them, as David was describing with his experience with Eero, they're going to be happy to do it. So authenticity.
Yeah, and we actually, we run, beta testing on our software, and we invite users to share our early builds and to comment on our early builds, and we create those, those relationships with our testers so that we can get better. And I'll also point back to Eero, as Dan just did, and they actually have, if you followed their Reddit group, they have one of their firmware engineers on the answering Reddit questions all day long, and you can tell that they tried to pull the guy after a while because he still needed to do a day job, and they put another customer service person on the Eero group, or on the Reddit group, and he still stuck around, and because he's the most authentic guy in the company to talk about this product, and because he is brilliant and answers questions, he's smart, he's funny, and is no BS, and is really, as you mentioned, authentic. And there's this authenticity to the way that product is being developed that is really quite refreshing.
That's great. That's a great story.
Well, we'll take a couple more questions, excuse me, and then we'll go ahead and wrap. So here's another. If IoT is nascent in your particular industry, should you go into the space trying to create an open or a closed ecosystem? And what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, it depends on what you're doing, right? If you are, tracking, parts for things that go in and out of airports, then you're going to create a closed system because that's not really a cloud use case for that customer. And there's nothing wrong with that being a closed ecosystem because it solves a very specific problem of finding things. And that is by definition, should probably be a closed ecosystem versus an open ecosystem where it's all about consumers and consumer behavior, where the product can get better over time based on interactions that are visible.
Yep.
If those interactions are visible and should be visible, then I think that's an open ecosystem. Dan?
Yeah, I agree completely. And the only thing I would add about the consumer markets and the ecosystem question there, or call it a platform question there, is I feel like in many of these markets, there's only going to be one or two platform winners. Whether it's going to be Google or whether it's going to be Amazon or whatever it is. And I don't think that should scare companies off from being in the space just because you aren't the one who originates the ecosystem, right? There's plenty of value to be created on top of ecosystems. And so that's kind of a side answer to this question. But if you're not in position to create that ecosystem, don't think that there still isn't room to play.
Yeah, well, this has been an excellent, absolutely excellent, informative dialogue. And I really want to thank our panelists, David Balcom from Stanley Black Decker and Dan Ostrower from Altitude, which is now an product innovation with Accenture. And I hope you have found today very valuable. If you would like any additional information on smart connected IoT, Dan does have a paper on our website. And we have other valuable resources at altitudeinc.com. Again, thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you, everyone, for listening in, and make it a great day.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, and thank you.